Hello, welcome to the Prescott Today show. My name is Harry Oberg. I'm the Mayor of Prescott, and I have with me today as my first guest, Mark Woodville. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Mayor.
He is the city's finance director, and we're going to be bringing a subject to you today, the public safety retirement system, and what we're trying to do with it is in relation to the budget that we have for Prescott. It's a pretty complex subject, but we'll try and cover it in a manner today that you'll be able to understand it. I think it's important that you understand this subject because we have an election coming up in May, Proposition 124, which is going to address one of the issues that we currently have with the public safety retirement system. But also we need to pay down the eventual debt that we already have established here. I think it's around 70 million, 71 million, something like that.
Yes,
So
sir.
we're going to be talking about that today and letting you know what we're going to try and do to try and resolve this situation for the city's budget. As you know, many might have been able to see the results of legislation in the paper where they were talking about Senator Debbie Lesko was talking to many of the unions down in Phoenix, police and fire, and also had the Reason Foundation working with her to try and come up with some kind of reform for the PSPRS program. And they were very successful. They passed 3 bills. The one that is coming up on the legislation or the budget initiative is, I think it was Bill 1428. And that one is the one that's going to be looking at the pension benefit increase. That's going to be on the ballot in May. And another one was also to look at how we're going to pay PSPRS employees going forward starting in 1 July 2017. But we'll get into that more in just a few minutes. I think the first thing I would like to do is have Mark explain to us the Reason Foundation's 2 slides that they provided us that kind of indicate the level of debt across the state. Mark, would you like to show us?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. These are the slides from the Reason Foundation's presentation. As you can see, back in 2003, the red area shows the unfunded liability in the PSPRS pension. And back in 2003, it was close to 0 as a system as a whole. And obviously today it's at 6.6 billion looking at 2015. And obviously with the funding ratio changing from there, it went from 100% funded in 2003 to about 48% funded today.
Okay, this is a state level.
Yes, all the
picture.
different funds together.
Yeah, and but I think it's a little bit worse for Prescott. Can you?
Yeah, Prescott is one of the older fire departments and police departments in the state, so we have a lot of history in our pensions, and the pensions are very small. So yes, our unfunded portion, our percentage is closer to 33% than 48% currently.
Okay. Why don't we take a look at the second slide, and if you can explain a little bit of what's going on here.
Sure. The actuarial reports, which is how you evaluate a pension as to the liability and assets in the pension and their wherewithal to meet the requirements, which is the funded slide that we looked at before. Part of that is a lot of assumptions, and one of the big assumptions is the assumed rate of return on assets. And that's the green bar down the middle of this graph is the assumed rate of return that the pensions use. The darker bar that's kind of jig-jagged all over the graph is the actual market returns. That's what the markets were returning during each of those years. And then the red bar is the actual return that the PSPRS pension earned on its assets through its investments and its investments policies. As you can see, it's been consistently below the assumed rate of return for the last 15 years, which has a tendency to grow your unfunded balance in those pensions by doing that.
Okay, and I see from the chart here, 2001, 2002, we had a major decline in the market, and also in 2008, 2009.
Right.
So about every 7 years, we're seeing some kind of decline normally.
Well, and again, that's those were the recessions that I'm sure we all remember from those periods. And recessions vary in time, but yeah, they do come around.
Can you explain what an unfunded pension liability is?
Well, sure. PSPRS is a agent multiple employer pension plan. It's made up of 256 individual trust funds or pensions for all the different agencies across the state.
So many of these are states and cities, cities and municipalities.
Definitely, cities, municipalities. City of Prescott actually has two. There's the one for the fire department and one for the police
Okay.
department. So we're actually two, and that's the way a lot of cities that have both police and fire are. Well, an unfunded pension liability is the actuarials that we were talking about. When they do a review of these all 256 individual pensions, they look at the several assumptions: assumed rate of return, which we talked about, employee turnover, estimated employee turnover, what employees will estimate to be making during their years working for the agency, when they will retire, how long they will be receiving benefits as they retire, just to mention a few of the many that they look at. They take all these, put them into their models, and come up with a total liability that the pension has for these future payments, and that's a current liability. They reduce that by the amount of assets that are available, and that returns your unfunded portion of liability. And as I said, our current assets only cover about 30% of our projected liability, leaving that $71 million unfunded pension obligation for our systems.
So how often do they go back and review the actuarials? Is that annually?
Yeah, annually they will do a new actuarial. The purpose of the actuarial is to look at performance, look at history that has happened since the last set of assumptions were used, and to come up with a new funding rate, the rate that the city or the employer will pay into the system in the coming years.
And of course, you can see the actuarials changing year to year based on, taking a review of whether people are living longer. I know back when I was a kid, men were living to 64. I think now it's 74. So that adds on to the time that they'll be receiving pension benefits. So something like that's probably causing changes to the actuarials fairly frequently, right?
Yeah, those type of changes do affect the actuarial course. That's why they do it every year, so that you can adjust those contribution rates to try to stay ahead of these amounts. The biggest portion of our employer rate that we pay each year is trying to pay off this unfunded liability. The PSPRS pension has the statewide board has determined that it needs to be paid off within the next 21 years to get us back to 100% funded. So that's why it's growing each year, how much we have to pay. Currently, for the coming year, we're looking at a fully actuarial rate for fire of around 75% of employees' pay, and for police about 72%.
Okay, so you're saying out of the general fund, that's how much we're providing out of the general fund?
No, I'm saying for every dollar we pay a fireman, we have to pay 75 cents into the pension to help fund these the current costs, but also these unfunded.
So a policeman is costing us not the $1 for his salary, he's costing us $1.75 because of the pension benefit.
Right, firemen.
Okay, I'm with you. You talk about a pension rate coming down from the PSPRS board. That comes down annually, and we have to pay a certain amount each year, right?
Right. The pension rate is set as part of the actuarial studies, and it's set as the contribution rate for the following year.
I've heard people say that we're only paying the minimum, that we're not paying the actual required amount that the PSPRS board directs us to pay. Can you explain what is actually happening?
Well, we are paying the amount that is set by the actuarial report, or there has been a 3-year phase-in, which we can talk about. But we do pay the amounts that are set by the board. We never pay less than the various amounts that are set. Obviously, as an agent multiple employer pension, the city is fully responsible for the liability in both of our two PSPRS pensions. So you could pay more. Instead of paying 75%, we could pay 100 to help bring that liability down. But we do pay what is set by the actuarial study that is done each year.
Okay. As you know, I guess it was about 2 to 3 years ago, we had 2 cases go against the taxpayer, and it caused a significant increase in our debt ratio. I understand there's a couple other cases that are out there right now. If they go against the taxpayer, how do you see that affecting the fund?
Well, the Hall case, which is the one that will probably be decided this year, it is challenging some of the state legislative changes that happened in 2011 to help improve the fund. It challenged certain aspects of that as unconstitutional. If that goes against the funds, it would have a pretty significant negative impact to our balance and everybody else in the state.
Right. And could we assume that it would be over 100 million maybe?
I would hate to assume, it will be part of the next actuarial if that is decided in time.
Well, I know you use the word significant, so I'm always trying to quantify that for our citizens.
As soon as it can be quantified, we definitely will make that public.
Now, you indicated that, the actuarial board has given us 21 years to pay off the current debt that we have, which is around 71 million. But obviously, I know when talking to the Reason Foundation, they felt that we should pay it off a lot quicker, and why is that?
Well, the pension obligation, the unfunded pension liability, is like any other debt. When we talk 71 million, it's what we owe today. There's additional cost to paying that off over time, which will, it's the projections from PSPRS, but that about $165 million if we pay it off over the 21 years, that's what we'll end up paying. So yes, the quicker you pay it off, the less you'll end up having to eventually pay in.
Okay, could you kind of explain very briefly the funds that we have at the city level and the one that we're talking about specifically right now that has to pay the PSPRS? Sure.
And again, as we look at the city budget, which is a significant budget, about $143 million for 16. If I could have slide 1 up. As you can see here, we've grouped our funds into 4 different categories. The red categories are restricted by state law or by local initiative as to what they can be spent on. So even though we have a significant budget each year at 148 million in 16, the 77% of that is in these red categories, and those include the Streets and Open Space Fund, which was limited by voter initiative to be used on street maintenance and open space, and now just street maintenance as of January 1. Our enterprise funds, which are our business entities like the water, the wastewater, the trash collection, which revenues from those service fees we charge there have to be used to provide that service. And then there's other funds, including our transient occupancy, our bed tax, as well as development impact fees and other smaller funds. The other 22%, 23% of the annual budget is in the general fund, or the blue column here. And that pays for the governmental operations of the city, which include recreation, the library, police and fire, and community development and general government. Those are the funds that we have available. That's about 35 million in the current budget. And that's where the funding for this unfunded pension has to come from. So, we have 148 million, but only 34 is really available for this to help pay off this long-term liability.
Okay, and what percentage of the general fund goes to pay police and fire right now for current operations and also their pension?
I believe it's around 76%.
Okay. Do we see that number growing in the future?
Well, definitely it's going to grow because a big chunk of that is the PSPRS cost to pay that off. So
the interest?
Well, just the increasing rate that we have to pay each year to help hit this 21-year payoff time frame.
Okay. So I know you didn't call it interest, but it's probably very similar to that.
Yeah, well, it's similar.
Yeah. When we have a need in the water fund, it seems like we can always take care of that. And when we have a need in police and fire, or in the blue column here that you talked about, recreation services, library, we seem to be kind of stymied in coming up with funding for that. Can you kind of explain the difference?
Sure. Well, definitely you said, our water fund is a business fund. It's an enterprise fund. It's in the red graph here. It's a service. We provide people water. They pay for that water. we incur costs, and that revenue that we get from it is to cover those costs. In the general fund, a large percentage of the revenue to fund that comes from taxes, local taxes, and our share of state shared revenue. Looking at the next slide, slide 2, you can see of the general fund, looking at the column for fiscal year 16 here, about 30 million is made up of our local taxes, which is the blue, and our share of state shared revenue, which is the red. The remaining 8% is made up of permits and service charges that we charge. And we do charge for services that we can in the general fund, but a vast majority of what we do in the general fund, police response, fire response, those type of things, we're prohibited by state law from actually charging fees for those. So it has to come from the tax. And unlike in the enterprise funds where you use water, there's a cost associated with that. There's a revenue associated with our sale of that. In the general fund, the correlation between taxes and the work and the demanded services by the citizens is not related. It's very loosely related.
Right. And right now, the blue area, I think, is the 2% sales tax we have.
No, this is the general fund. Only 1% of the 2% sales tax go into the general fund. So that's primarily the 1% sales tax plus the property tax and some franchise taxes that we receive.
So 1%, how much is that annually for us?
It's about $13–14 million a year.
Okay. And I notice here back in 2007, we're up to about 35 million, and over this period of what,
About
8
10
years? Yeah, 9 years. We still haven't gotten back up to that. It looks like we're still about $2.5 million short.
Right, and again, on that second graph we looked at, there were those spikes down in the markets, and of course that was the recession in 2007, 2008. Had a significant impact on our sales tax and on our state shared revenue as a state as a whole. And you're right, we have not been able to get back to those revenue levels. And over that period of time, the city has had significant budget problems and had made several cuts in services and other things to make the budget balance each year.
And I think during that period of time, didn't we reduce the city staffing?
Oh, significantly, yes. We
About
reduced
70 folks? Or?
Yeah, we went from close to 600 to we're right at or just below 500.
Okay, so almost 100 people.
Yeah, almost 100 people with things we've done.
And I noticed
recently.
that fees back then were a little bit higher than they are today. And I know talking to the building department some time back, I asked them if they were recovering all their costs. And they said that during the downturn, they lowered their fees to try and continue to have people being able to afford to build homes and stuff of that nature in a down economy. And we're starting to see fees increase. Can you tell me where some of the fees are increasing?
Yeah, the council will be looking on May 3rd meeting at the building fees and some engineering fees that we looked at earlier this year. We'll be coming back for further council discussion. So yes, we'll see some building fees and inspection fees be going up.
Okay.
Will be going up.
And didn't we have a recent fee increase in Parks and Rec?
Yes, we increased our parking fee from $2 to $3 at our lakes and trailhead.
Okay. I think it's important for people to realize that we're doing everything we can with what we have to work with. We're looking at fees. We're looking at state shared revenue. I know that sometimes the state legislature actually cuts some of our ability to get funds or takes away our ability to fund. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, and again, that's something we've seen over the last 10 years on this graph, which is what's kept us from coming back, is there's been several initiatives at the state level that changed what a city, even a charter city like Prescott, can tax. There's been changes to what is considered construction, taxable construction activity, changes to what is taxable rental activity related to related parties. Those type of things have also hindered us trying to get back to the revenue that we had before to provide the local services that are needed.
Right. And I think there was a couple of initiatives again this year to take even further reductions from us, but we were able to Those did not pass here, but I'm sure they'll come up again in the future.
Yeah, every year there's several initiatives to further change it from lobbyists to keep their industries from having to pay tax.
Right. We talked a lot about taxes. What is the tax rate for Prescott compared to surrounding communities?
If we look at the next slide, you can see looking at taxes, you need to look at all municipal type services. So looking here, you can see Prescott on the bottom at 2% is lower than Prescott Valley and Chino Valley both. And neither of those communities provide fire and EMS service. They only provide the police and the basic governmental services. So if we look at fire and police, again, we're lower here, and then on our next graph, if we could, we compare the city's property tax rate to Central Yavapai Fire District, which is the fire district that provides fire and EMS in Prescott Valley and in the county around Prescott. So a $200,000 house in the city limits of Prescott will pay about $61 a year in property tax for municipal services, only $61. Outside the city or in Prescott Valley, they'll pay $486 a year more, or $547 a year for fire and police services.
And as I understand, Central Yavapai is asking for an increase on their caps. So you'll probably see some kind of an increase in their property tax rate in the future.
And you've seen that as you look at this graph. This is the last 6 years. You can see Central Yavapai's tax rate is that green bar or green line across the top, and it goes up pretty much every year.
So they can go up about 2% every year.
The city of Prescott is limited 2% increase on our levies. Fire districts have different laws that govern what they can go up each year.
Okay. We go back to that other chart just for a second, previous one. I noticed we have the Yavapai Reservation at 1.5. None of that sales tax comes to the city, right? Correct?
No, and that's, again, on the reservation, as you point out, Mayor, which is Frontier Village, essentially. And yeah, it's for the Yavapai Reservation, which, again, the municipal services they provide are generally funded from other sources out there, and obviously do not have as many municipal services as the city of Prescott.
Yeah. And I noticed that Chino Valley and Prescott Valley have pretty high tax rates, but that doesn't count anything for fire.
No, that is just for...
Because that's a separate district.
Right, that's what the property tax graph.
Yeah, so that's, they actually have more money to spend for other things rather than for fire service.
Yes.
Where we have to spend ours for fire service.
Right, and as we talked before, the tax rate in Prescott, we always, our charter requires a vote of the public. In Chino Valley or Prescott Valley, most cities in the state do not require a vote of the public.
So the city council can make an increase if they want to.
Yes, and we saw that in PV this last year. Their council decided in, I believe, November to up it 0.5% to 2.83.
Okay. Nobody likes taxes, and I think the public would like to know that we're not wasting money. Can you talk about the process that the city has gone through in determining our budget?
Yeah, as we mentioned, looking at the graph of over time and our revenues, ever since the 2007-2008 recession, we've had significant budget challenges with changes at the state level and other things. And we've made significant service cuts, reductions of employees, as we said, 70 to 80 employees over that time period, and obviously changed our models of providing service. We do that every year. It's an important aspect of going through a governmental budget is to make sure you're still providing the services the citizens want. And even this year, the council instituted a mid-year budget cut of around $1 million or $1.1 million January 1st of 2016. And we are currently looking at new models for police and fire service delivery through presentations to council, which will be part of the discussion as we get into the 17 budget.
Right. And I've talked to a number of people, and really I feel the problem with the paying off the public safety retirement system pension debt is really a state issue. Legislators are the one that designed the PSPRS system. The governor is the one that selects the board. The governor is the one that can remove a board or board members if they're not their fiduciary responsibilities are not up to speed. And very little has happened down there. So I think a lot of the problems that I'm seeing needs to be resolved at state level. And one of the things I think would be helpful is for the governor to take this on as an effort that he wants to try and eliminate this problem for the cities, particularly if the Hall and Parker cases go against us. We could see some cities actually being bankrupt with the increased cost. So, you know, I feel that maybe the governor ought to look at a 1% increase to the Arizona state sales tax. Do you think that would help?
Well, yes, it would definitely help. I think the pension reform the legislature did this year was very good. Is a good place to start. Obviously, if the governor could come up with a way to fund all 256 of these individual pension trusts, we could look at further pension reform for PSPRS to maybe combine all of these 256 pensions into one statewide pension, which would be more fairly sound. It would be a little more financially stable as we moved into the future, setting an employer rate consistent across the state and employee rate the same, so that you don't have, police in Prescott Valley, Prescott Valley has to pay 20% or whatever of their pay, where we have to pay 75%. It really changes the service levels that different communities are able to provide.
Right. Well, I think it's clear that we're doing everything we can with the money we have in the general budget. We're trying to, look at fees, any other way that we can increase our revenue so that we can support the debt obligation that we have right now. But obviously, I think we're not going to see much movement in that fund to be able to pay off PSPRS. So thank you for your time today. And
sure.
When we come back, I'll have Don Hirsch, our real estate manager here, and we'll take a look at see if there's any other options that we can use to pay off the PSPRS debt that we have for Prescott. Welcome back to the Prescott Today show. My name is Harry Oberg. I'm the Mayor of Prescott. We just had on Mark Woodfield, the City Finance Director. We were talking about the city's budget, in particular the general fund, and its ability to pay off the public safety retirement system debt that we have, which is right around $71 million. If you missed that, well, hopefully you can watch the show later on and see what he had to say, because it was very important. I think the big thing that he mentioned was that we're not going to be able to do much with the budget. There's not much flexibility there for us to be able to go in and pay off that substantial debt that we have. So another area that we're starting to look at the city is what we might have in the way of assets that could be sold, leased, something of that nature, that could be utilized to generate some additional income to help offset the pension liability that we have for the public safety system. And today I have, for the second half here, Don Hirsch, the real estate manager for Prescott City. And welcome.
Afternoon, Mayor.
And I'm sure you're going to give us a lot of options here we can sell, and there's no restrictions on any of our property, and we can just about lease out and make everything count, right?
Probably not so much.
Okay. Well, I think I'd like to get started here. And the city owns a lot of property, and it's for various reasons. Some we're given by trusts and things of that nature.
Sure.
Some we've purchased. Some we've had the public come to us and say they'd like us to buy,
Sure.
such as open space. So can you explain their uses and why the city owns them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think another part of this conversation we probably should have too is, just so the viewers know, if we do actually sell a piece of property, the funds that purchase that piece of property is where the funds need to go back to. So if we purchased it with a water fund, like a water tank site as an example, and we end up selling that site if we no longer used it, the money would have to go back into the water fund. It couldn't go back into the general fund. So if you sell something that's a water fund property, it couldn't go back into the general fund, so it's not going to help the PRS. As far as property the city owns, any municipality is going to own lots of property for various reasons. You're going to have fire department, the fire department's going to need fire stations. The police department, they're going to need administrative offices. Public works, well, we're going to, for that areas, we're going to need city streets. We're going to need places to put our infrastructure for wastewater and water treatment plants. So there's lots of different areas that we aren't going to use for all those different things. In order for the city to actually provide the water we have, probably be a good example. We have different areas that we purchase. We purchase water rights by purchasing the land, and the water rights come with the land. And we purchase that with water funds, because that's where the funds have to come from for the water services. Roadways, we're working on expanding new roadways and stuff. We purchase that with street funds for the roadways. And if we ever did something with that, we'd have to put the money back into the street funds. And it kind of goes that way throughout the entire city. Even, we have administrative offices for the downtown, for the city hall, where people can come and do the city business and things like that. It's just a big part of it. And what a lot of people don't understand, what they don't see, is all the infrastructure is more hidden, I guess. It's like a lot of our well sites, they may be all the way out in Chino Valley, or they could be all the way out in Paulden. Because we have some on a slide, probably show some of these areas way out to the north. Way out in Big Chino, we have a Big Chino water ranch, which is out to Big Chino Road. That's like 20 miles from the highway, where people won't even realize it's out there.
Northwest of Paulden.
Northwest Paulden. And the reason we purchased that with water funds is for water rights, strictly for the water rights. If we want to have more water in the city of Prescott, well, we had to have more water rights, so we have the right to actually pump water out of the ground. We can't really sell that area. If we did, even it's like 4,500 acres in that area. But if we did, we wouldn't have the water rights, so we wouldn't be able to have the water to turn the faucets on.
Yeah.
So that's a big issue.
And I think we need that to get to safe yield by 2025.
Exactly.
So we really can't sell that.
Exactly. And also out in the Chino Valley area, there's some different areas in there. There are either well sites or pump stations, so we can actually transport the water from there all the way to the city of Prescott. And then once we get into the city of Prescott, we have lots of areas in town where we have places for water tanks. We've got to be able to store the water so that it can actually get to private properties and businesses. A lot of those things people don't realize. Well, because of the topography in Prescott, you also need pump stations, because it's not all flat and level like it is in Florida. You need to be able to pump that water up and over the hills. We have pump stations all over, so we have to have parcels of land for that. And again, all those things were purchased with water funds. Mm-hmm. When we're doing different projects and stuff like that, as an example, when we redid Copper Basin Road, we redid the water infrastructure in that whole area for that whole water zone. Then we moved a tank from one place to another. Maybe we added some pump stations, so we had to buy land for that. Maybe we didn't need the other stations anymore. And over the years, we've been able to sell some pieces of property as needed.
Mm-hmm. And I think we also have infrastructure for sewer and wastewater.
Sewer and wastewater, and it's the same kind of thing. Our wastewater treatment plant is actually all the way out here by the airport, our new wastewater treatment plant. State-of-the-art plant, very amazing, but to get the wastewater from people's homes in town to there, you have to have pump stations to be able to pump that all the way to there. So again, we needed parcels of land to be able to put those pump stations on it.
Okay. And I think it's important that you mention that, and we just saw the chart a little bit ago of the ones that were highlighted in red, which are restricted funds, and that's water, sewer, solid waste, things of that nature, open space, streets, and like you say, the money that we spend out of those for buying city property, if we do sell it, it has to go back to those funds. It can never come over and help the general fund paying off the public safety
That's
retirement
correct.
system.
Absolutely correct.
There seems to be very few city properties not currently being used for their original intended purpose. So it doesn't appear that we have a lot of surplus property. Why is that?
Back in the early 1990s, the city went through a kind of a similar process we're going through right now. They're kind of looking at ways for funds, and they said, let's look at all the property we could possibly sell that we no longer need for one purpose or another. And they went through a very exhaustive study on it and went through in the early 1990s, 1992, 1993 time period, and sold off basically everything that was no longer needed. They took those funds, put them into sold all those properties, put them into a fund, and they used those funds to do things like the library expansion, the adult center, and things like that to bring up the infrastructure. With those funds saying, okay, we don't need this particular water tank site anymore because we've relocated that water tank. But hey, you can't use that now to do a library expansion. But back then, what you could do is use other properties that were from the general fund, other properties. Maybe it was a city municipal building that was no longer needed, and you could sell that, and you could use those funds for doing a library expansion.
And I think you've done an assessment recently, taking a look at property we bought in the past and what we paid for it, and what we could possibly sell it for today. And I think in the past, particularly if people knew there was funding available, they held out for the highest price. Is that basically what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you see that in government all the time. It's just people do it. Figure it's one way they can hold out and try to get the higher dollar than they probably should have. Plus, another part of that also is going to be real estate values that come down. So we may have bought it when things were really high, and if you go to try to sell it now, well, it's going to be really low. And another part of that is if you sell something, well, if you sell it today and you come back and you may need to purchase that again for another pump station or something in that area. So sometimes you really need to look at why you would want to sell something really in-depthly.
Okay. Are some of our assets better sold rather than trying to find a higher or better use for them?
What we try to do always with our city properties, because the citizens purchase them. So we're real concerned with the funds. When citizens purchase a piece of property, we try to look to see, first of all, if there's another city purpose that we can use it for. A good example again would be a water tank site. So we have redone a lot of our water infrastructure over the years because we had to. If we remove a water tank off of a site, maybe it's an area that after it's done, you got a nice level spot like that. Maybe it's possibly could be in a location where it's right next to a trail, which some of them are.
And it has a road to it. So.
And it's got a road to it. Yeah. Wouldn't that be? Now you have a great place to create that into a trailhead for walking and biking. Another thing you have to look at is, okay, it's no longer used for this particular purpose, but you know what? In the next few years, we're going to be putting in a new sewer main through this area. We may be able to use that for a new pump station for this sewer main on that particular parcel to repurpose it. So we really look at it really hard to do that. It's difficult to find parcels in this topography that we have that works really well with all of our infrastructure we need to have, especially for water and for sewer. So if we have something that we already have that works, it's a good place to try to keep it if we can, for one purpose or another.
And as we have further expansions and new developments, annexation of land and stuff of that nature, are we looking at trying to get developers to do a lot of the water and sewer work that needs to move water or move wastewater? And are they actually providing the land, or are we having to buy that land?
They are almost 100% donating the land to the city for all the water and sewer throughout their entire subdivisions they're doing, and even to connecting it to it in some instances. So
basically, at some point we take that over, become city property?
Yeah, we have them build it to our standards, and after the subdivision has gotten to a certain point, then we take it over. Over.
So we're not always going to be using city money to help develop these areas. We're actually trying to get the developers to fully put the infrastructure in for their areas, and then at some point we assume the responsibility for further maintenance and upkeep to the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think mostly what we're doing where we have to do it ourselves is stuff that has been in the ground for many decades. Okay, yeah. A lot of the old 80-year-old water lines.
So it's replacing
like
old
infrastructure. Replacing old infrastructure with new, more modern.
Okay. Have you determined the value of all the property that Prescott owns?
No. Well, that'd be quite a project. We have a lot of property. And the big problem with trying to put a value on everything at a particular given time is a snapshot in time. If you want to know what a piece of property is worth and you do it today, well, you might not need to actually know what it's worth a year from now. The value is completely different. So it's really as we need it. I do evaluation on every property as we need it, and that's done pretty often.
Okay. I've had several people ask me why we don't sell or lease the golf course. I think we have land that we've been given either through land grants or, like I said earlier, trusts, or we have restrictions placed on us by various requirements. Can you explain some of the restricted areas that we have?
Yeah, well, a few of them, you just mentioned the golf course. That's a good one to start with up here. The north course for the golf course is actually a part of the federal grant for the airport. We can't do anything with that. It's actually tied to the airport itself.
So that was
that's
a government asset at one point, and then they turned it over to us, but we can't get rid of it.
correct.
basically.
Yes,
Okay.
they say yeah, you can have it, but you need to use it for this purpose. And the other reason for having it there, of course, is you need to have areas around an airport for safety reasons
Yeah, noise mitigation.
and all of that stuff. Other areas you're going to see would be like Acker Park. Acker Park was donated to the city, and it has deed restrictions on it. You can't sell that. Other ones you're going to have, I can just use I guess open space would be another one to talk about. Open space, all the open space that we were purchased with the open space funds, that was actually a tax for open space and streets. Those properties are to remain as open space in perpetuity per city ordinance, and they can never be sold. That's why they're purchased that way. So we can't sell those. A commercial building that was donated to the city. An example would be like 215 McCormick Street. Property was donated to the city for a specific purpose, for fire department training purposes. And a part of the deed restrictions are we cannot sell that property for 10 years, and that's what it needs to be used for. So you can't sell that. And there's lots of properties, I say, that are really tied up in that direction. Anything that's been donated, pretty much as always, when somebody donates property to the city, they have a reason for it, and they put a deed restriction on it for that.
Yeah, and I notice over here we got the rodeo grounds. That's a long-established area, and I don't think anybody wants to see that move. It's such a great asset for the city of Prescott, and but there's a lot of land there, and of course it's highlighted as being, owned by Prescott, but we sure don't want to sell it. Also, the lakes were purchased. A lot of people think that was open space money that bought that. Really, it was to improve our water portfolio so that we could meet our water needs.
Correct.
So can you explain a little bit about how that was purchased?
So a few of those parcels, were purchased with open space funds. A couple of them are in this area over here, and a couple other spots. But in general, no, they were not. Water funds would purchase those, and we need to maintain that. So if we again, it goes back to that same thing that if you sell something that comes from a certain fund, the funds need to go back into where it came from. So those would not help what we're talking about is the PSPRS.
Right. And a lot of this yellow area around the lakes was not purchased with open space. It was basically land that was acquired to support the lakes.
Exactly.
And
correct.
be a buffer for the lakes, as I understand.
Correct.
So we won't sell those because we're going to have to maintain those to keep our water portfolio at a level that we can provide water for everybody in the city of Prescott. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I've had others say that we should sell some of our open space parcels since we don't have the funds to maintain them and keep them fire safe. I hear a lot of people say, well, if you go out there, they're not being maintained, and if a fire starts there, it could transmit to private property. So, why don't you sell it if you can't maintain it? What are the issues with selling open space parcels that we have acquired or purchased?
Well, again, open space, because it was purchased with open space funds, going back to the city ordinance, it literally says we cannot do so. The only way that could ever be changed is have the voters go back and vote and say, no, we want to be able to do that. So it would actually take an entire voter referendum to change that, to allow that to happen.
Okay. And I think we have some land out by Goldwater Lake and
that way south of town, correct.
And I think there's also some out by Hacienda Lake.
We used to have some out by Hacienda Lake. That the city sold back in that 1992 time frame, actually, in that area. The only piece we have left out there is like a 20-foot by 50-foot piece of land that was left over because nobody wanted it because it was actually the entrance to an old mine out there.
Okay.
It's the only piece we have left out there. Goldwater Lake, we have all the lake area around the lake itself. Again, that was part of our watershed. There's another parcel just south of that, which is actually a camp that's been leasing that from us from like 1956, I believe it is. And we get income off of that particular parcel because we're actually leasing it to them. As we also do, this parcel is northeast of the airport. We have a large parcel out there that APS leases from us for a solar plant. So we have different parcels around town we try to lease, to try to create income from, which helps out. And even on some of our city water tank sites and things like that because of the topography. Again, they're at a pretty good elevation throughout town. A lot of the cell phone providers, they like using those areas for us for their towers, and we lease them out to them at a pretty decent rental rate.
Okay, so basically we got a water tank someplace and it's on high ground normally, so you get proper gravity flow.
Correct.
And so they utilize that for microwave stations. And
Exactly.
well, I'm sure we're getting some money, but we're not getting significant amounts of money. Is that correct?
That's very true. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, as far as going towards the general fund, it's a very small amount of money.
Right.
It really is.
So I think it's very clear that we've looked at the budget and there's a lot of leeway there and flexibility without cutting services, and we don't want to do that if we can help it. We've taken a look at our assets that we have available. Now, we didn't get into equipment. There could be possibly equipment such as vehicles, things of that nature that we could sell. But again, I don't think we're going to get much money from that.
No.
Basically, in my discussions with you and Mark Woodville, we'd be lucky to get 50% of what we paid for these assets, even though some are relatively new.
Yeah.
And so I think when we take a look at, like I said, the budget, and we take a look at the land that we have and the ability to lease or sell, there's very limited opportunities there to help pay off the PSPRS.
Very,
Unfunded
very,
liability.
very, very limited.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, thank you, Don. I really appreciate it.
Welcome,
and
Mayor.
I guess that means we're going to have to move forward to looking at some other sources of funding, and I'm quite sure that's going to be taxes of some sort. And that'll be for another time. There's a number of areas there that we can take a look at, such as whether or not we can get our property tax increased. We have a city property tax as well as a county property tax, and it could be a possibility that the legislature may allow us to go in and increase our property tax to a small amount. That would help. But again, some of these things about whether or not the 0.6% that's being looked at as an initiative on the ballot in November, whether or not that would be particularly helpful and really get us to where we need to be either. So I think that discussion is going to have to come up at another time. So thank you for joining us today. I would like to let everybody know that you have the opportunity to not call in, but you do have an opportunity to send in email questions. And I have one here today I would like to go ahead and answer. The lady says, I support and agree with you and the council on helping our community with defensible space planning and becoming fire wise. I support the idea of educating the public on how to plan and build defensible space around homes as a combined effort to reduce damage and loss. I believe and agree that the homeowner needs to bear responsibility too, not just the city of Prescott and our forestry services. What can we do, Red Cross volunteers and friends, do with the city to continue to educate public on this very important topic as a combined effort? Well, first of all, I'd like to make everybody aware that there is an organization in town called PWIC, the Prescott Area Wildland Urban Interface Commission. And it meets once a month out at the fairgrounds. And they're trying to get various housing developments in the Prescott area to come in and become fire wise. And they provide some grant funding to help clear land, also chipping services, things of that nature. We have a pamphlet down at the city that we ask people to take a look at, and for volunteers if they want to get those, and if they have a setup someplace where they're maybe selling something or have some kind of a special event, they could have those brochures available there and explain them to people. And we look at, there's about 2 or 3 areas around a home to make them fire safe. There's a initial area goes out about 6 to 10 feet. I don't remember the pamphlet criteria right now, that you shouldn't have anything that can be burned, such as brush or trees. And then there's another zone out from there, and then finally the one that for large trees that could fall on the property if they burned goes out to about 100 feet. So I'd ask everybody to take a look at those pamphlets and take a look at their property and make sure that they're being fire wise, but also to try and take a look at what the PWIC has to offer in the way of services to make the various developments here fire-wise. So I want to thank everybody for viewing us today. We plan to do this once a month. We try and bring some kind of a subject that we are sure is near and dear to everybody in the city, and that we're having to deal with at the city level, and give you further information so that you can see that we're taking positive action on a lot of the issues facing Prescott. So thank you for watching today, and look forward to talking to you next month. Thank you.